Greetings and salutations, friends. My name's Mr. Adrian, and this is Microsoft Flight Simulator. A new patch has been released, so we are on version 1.7.14.0. And what did that patch do for us? Well, most of it fixes some stability issues with the initial release of the sim. Let's take a quick look at the patch notes. Stability issues. The title will no longer crash when the current input device peripherals are disconnected. The title will no longer crash when the TBM 930 package is deleted. Installation issues have been taken care of. The process will no longer be blocked after a partial decompression of the package. It won't be blocked when the local user account has non-ASCII characters in it. The install process won't be blocked after a failed connection to the servers. The install process will no longer display an empty onboarding screen under certain conditions. And the title will download a critical missing deleted package to access the main menu if the save data preferences is set offline, which is quite handy, I would imagine. Updates to the content manager include titles will no longer automatically download packages that have been deleted through the content manager, which is quite nice. It's, when you delete something, it now stays deleted. And it will now no longer get stuck in an infinite loading state when being checked in offline mode. And the creator name of the package should now be properly updated. As far as third-party SimConnect, significant FPS drops when using SimConnect should no longer affect the experience, or the simulator, I would imagine. Optimizations. The performance of the title has been improved somewhat when the display name template option is set to active. And as far as the marketplace goes, the correct currency is now properly displayed in the marketplace. So the next patch is currently in the testing phase. It's not quite ready. They haven't released a lot of detail. Well, they've released some details on it, but not like, an actual list of what will be included. But they will be posting a complete patch list prior to the release. So I'll be doing this again soon. Yay! As you may have noticed, my initial takeoff was not necessarily from an airport, or indeed from an airstrip. It was in fact from a racecourse, based in Long Island. There's a reason for this. It's in fact the first takeoff point for the United States Air Mail Service, which was, I believe it was started back on March the 1st, 1918. The post office made an agreement with the War Department to inaugurate a mail service between Washington, D.C. and New York. They tried to get it to begin on May the 15th. The schedule had been announced and it was supposed to start at 11 a.m. May the 15th. And it was going to contain daily flights 5 days a week between Washington, Philadelphia, and New York. The initial aircraft were provided by Curtiss, and the initial takeoff points were, get this, Belmont Park, a small racetrack on Long Island, was going to be used as the infield and terminus, so the training of the pilots would not interfere with the proximity of another airport in the area. Philadelphia was actually the midpoint, used for refueling, as a matter of fact, because it's a fair distance for the aircraft of that time. The Washington, D.C. field would actually be the Potomac Park's old polo grounds, which is a 900 by 300 foot grassy area surrounded by trees and a tidal basin and the Potomac River. So, landing there was a little hairy because you had water on either side and just a grass field to touch down on. The fleet actually wanted to use the airport at College Park in Maryland, but the post office officials objected because it was 9 miles outside the city and too far from the main post office. The initial flight carried some 140 pounds of mail in one of these poor little aircraft. Actually left the field about 45 minutes late after a little bit of a mix-up with a fuel tank. It was dry when they were trying to start the plane, and it took them a little while to figure out why. The initial climb out of the airfield saw the pilot clear the trees by about 3 feet because of the load in the aircraft. Unfortunately, though, about an hour after he left the polo grounds, the pilot became lost and, nearly out of gas, had to land in a farmer's field at Waldorf, Maryland, about 20 miles southeast of his takeoff point. The plane had actually flipped over on its back and the prop was splintered, but the pilot was unhurt. The contents of the aircraft, the mail, was very quietly trucked back to Washington. Upon his takeoff, he was supposed to follow the railroad tracks northwards towards Philadelphia. Unfortunately, he had become confused and followed a branch line from the rail yard that took him southeast instead of north, and the compasses on aircraft in those days were somewhat unreliable. The aircraft from Philadelphia, however, didn't experience half as many problems, and it landed on time and carried about 600 letters, including one the President Wilson had in fact autographed. This was actually later auctioned off for benefit of the Red Cross in New York for about $1,000. 2 days later, 2 pilots took off from the polo grounds, one escorting the other. They followed the railroad, and then the one pilot, flying escort, turned back, confident that the other gentleman could carry on without getting lost. Unfortunately, he got lost, and after 3 hours and 50 minutes, he landed in a pasture at Cape Charles, on the tip of the Virginia Peninsula. A report of the operations noted that only the Atlantic Ocean and a lack of gas prevented him from going any further. Not willing to give up, the pilot actually purchased some tractor gas and oil from a local farmer, asked for directions, and took off again. This time he actually found Philadelphia and flew around the city looking for the airfield until he ran out of gas. He crash-landed between 2 birch trees on a golf course. Now keep in mind, of course, pilots though in those days were following the old-style maps. You know, the large paper ones that you would have to unfold. And of course they contain little detail. And of course, in addition to poor maps, the magnetic compasses in the airplanes were highly inaccurate and were generally affected by anything and everything metal aboard the airplane. So the pilots almost had to have a sixth sense about navigating, and many didn't acquire this until they had flown a long time. At the end of the first month of operations, the Post Office actually published a press release noting that some 10,800 pounds of mail had been flown over 1,000 miles at an average speed of 70 miles an hour. So on June the 3rd, the first airmail flight was scheduled to be made between New York and Boston on a single round-trip basis. This route also experienced some issues on its very first flight. However, on June 11th, with a 64-pound bag of mail, a run was made from Boston to New York. Visibility was almost zero, and the pilot was quite literally flying over the top of telephone poles the majority of the way. The whole experiment lasted about 3 months, and the Army pilots had successfully completed some 270 flights and carried 4,500 pounds of mail. They had flown a total of 421.5 hours without any fatalities or serious injuries. Of all the trips flown, 53 were actually forced down because of bad weather en route, and 16 ended in forced landings due to mechanical difficulties with the Curtiss. The last flight by the Army Air Service pilots took place on Saturday, August 10, 1918. The Post Office Department took over the airmail operation officially the following Monday and continued until September 1st, 1927. And by the time the airmail service of the Post Office Department was fully replaced by commercial operators flying the mail under government contract, a transcontinental route had been established. Radio aids to navigation and blind flying instruments were being developed, and planes were flying day and night. Today's modern airline industry is a direct outgrowth of those pioneering efforts. And some of those efforts are still visible today. There are giant white crosses that actually dot the American landscape. These crosses are actually used by these early airmail pilots to navigate across the country. Well, that's enough of this historical nonsense. I'm going to go ahead and land this thing, if I can, in third person, because why not? When the next update comes out, I will of course find another interesting place to fly and fill your brains with completely and utterly useless historic information. But until then, this is Mr. Adrian, giving a rather bumpy landing and saying, fly safe.